afternoon and welcome to the RAM Symposium. This hour will feature participant support, incentive payments. I'm Liza Hun, your moderator for the session. Please note that today's presentation is being recorded. This presentation will last about 60 minutes. All participants are currently muted. During interactive portions, they'll invite you to unmute and use your video as you feel comfortable. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat feature or raise your hand. We'll be monitoring the chat box throughout the presentation. Closed captioning is available under the Teams option menu. Please make note of today's. Oh, we're just going to do the link for the survey at the end, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for today, Tracy Trujillo and Catherine Kane.
Thank you for that introduction, Liza. I'm Tracy Trujillo. I am a research administrator in the Warner College of Natural Resources. I've been at CSU for 33 years and been in Central Sponsored Programs office for probably about half of that. And now I'm back in the college doing proposal submissions. I'm Catherine Kane. I'm Director of Research Support for the College of Liberal Arts, and I also support libraries. I've been at CSU 29 years, about 15 of those sponsored projects, research support. Okay, so getting started on this, participant support or incentive cost was such a popular presentation last time. Tricia Callahan and Kim Melville Smith shared their incurred presentation with our campus. So we brought it back and we freshened it up with some of our perspectives. Oh, there we go. The technology I have next. So participant support versus incentives. So this session is going to discuss the differences between participant support or participation incentives, as I like to call them. It gives a little bit more definition to the two different perspectives on proposal. Participant support and participation incentive costs are two different things. Participant support is exempt from indirect costs, whereas participation incentive costs are not. We will recognize the allowable and unallowable costs for both and discuss financial and other considerations for both throughout this presentation. So right now, I'd like you to take 30 seconds just to jot down some key points that in your mind define participant support versus key points that would define participation incentives. And feel free to put them in the chat for those in the virtual audience. Time it. In the chat.
Valerie is typing.
Okay. So I've set my timer because I have a tendency to think that goes by really fast.
Valerie says support, no indirect, incentives, indirect.
As I noted earlier, that's exactly right. So participant support costs are typically exempt from indirect costs. Participation incentives are not. And then our next slide. So we're just going to discuss this one. Here's kind of a case study. In the original presentation, they did a poll. We're not going to do that. So students are participating. Oh, one more. Thank you. There we go. Students are participating in a research study on the benefits of aerobic exercise. They are paid $100 to exercise during the semester. So for those in the virtual audience and those here in person, we'd like your feedback on what you think this fits. Participant support or participation incentive?
The incentive, participation incentives.
Okay. Thank you. Any in the virtual chat? Okay. I'm going to the next.
Oh, hold on, somebody's typing.
Okay.
They went away. Oh, no, there it goes. Participation incentives. Thank you.
Agree. Thank you. All right, so we'll start with a discussion on participant support costs and what those are, a bit of description of those, and also what you do with them once they're received as an award. So this definition is from the uniform guidance. And I won't read that to you. This is typical citing language from uniform guidance, but participant support costs are paid to individuals who are attending a training session, a symposium, workshop, conference. Participants are there to learn. The main purpose of those events are to learn and or receive training. Participant support costs are paid to individuals, not to the participants collectively. So that individual word is pretty key when you're considering whether something's a participant support cost or not. There are no deliverables. Participants are not expected to return anything at the end of the conference or other training event, although they are expected to complete those activities of the training. Employees are not eligible to be participants or anybody who is compensated on the grant that's funding the training event. Some examples that of participant support activities that I've dealt with recently, specific to NSF, there's the REU and the REG research experience for undergrads or graduates. We have a grant that will pay stipends to students and then bring them on campus in the summer for a summer workshop. So they receive stipends, they'll receive travel money. We've had, let's see, we had a summer workshop where we brought high school dance teachers to campus to work with our faculty. They received a stipend and travel funding. Another one's one of my anthropology professors who received an NSF conference grant to bring experts together to talk about the latest research findings. So it can also be a collection of experts to discuss educational techniques or recent research findings. So it doesn't always have to be somebody who's coming to learn from a trainer. It can be a collection of experts as well. Any questions on?
Hold on. What is subsistence?
We're going to get to that.
All right, hold on.
So the next slide. So any other questions on just the general description of participant support costs? I got this one up with the different categories. Yeah, so
You want me to go to the next one?
participant support costs fall into 4 categories. They will always fall into these categories. So stipends, travel, substance, and other. So we're going to go through and discuss each of these and give you examples of what each cost would be. Tracy. So stipends and subsistence. A stipend is in lieu of salary. So it is a flat amount that is paid to participants. It's not, when you're budgeting care, for example, it's not entered into personnel, it's entered under participant support costs. Subsistence basically is helping the person get there. So it's kind of sort of a way of not living expenses, but it would be a cost that they need to undertake in order to attend the function. So if they need meals, taxis, or whatever while they're at the workshop, that sort of thing, it's subsistence. So it's not real specific in what is covered. It's just kind of a general piece that's allowed on top of the travel or stipends. There could be travel within the town that they're in, getting to the conference or the workshop, where meals or lodging are furnished without charge or a nominal cost. The per diem or subsistence allowance should be correspondingly reduced. So again, if they're getting subsistence to cover meals, you can't also have it included in the overall conference costs, so you can't double dip on those costs. Local participants may participate in conference meals and coffee breaks. Funds may not be proposed to pay per diem or similar expenses for local participants. Again, it's all in line with what is required to get them there. If they're local, they don't have the additional travel costs that somebody coming from out of town would have. And then costs related to NSF sponsored conference, venue, rental fees, catering costs, supplies that will be secured through a service agreement contract should be budgeted on other direct costs in the NSF applications to ensure appropriate allocation of indirect costs. So again, the venue honorariums, those are not participant support costs. So the cost of putting on that workshop is not going to be, those things would not be participant. That would be a normal budget line item that would incur indirect costs.
Question.
Yeah,
You said that the honorarium,
for speakers,
yeah, but then you said that you could consider experts coming to see you as the participants.
typically in a participant support scenario, the benefit cannot be to a research project. The benefit has to be to the participants. That's NSF's definition of participant support. So if you've got, we've had cases where we have people coming in, it's a meeting with experts on the project, and you're kind of helping drive the scope of work, or you're going to have some impact in the scope of work. That's not participant support costs. The overriding benefit has to be to the individuals attending. So it's quite typically, there are exceptions, as with anything in research administration. There's hardly ever any black and white. But for the most part, it's got to be something that's going to benefit the participants and not the research project. If it's a meeting for research project experts to get together and it's ultimately benefiting one of the tasks or part of the scope of work, driving that scope of work, then that's just a regular workshop and it's subject to FNA. Any other questions on that slide before I move on?
Wants to travel. Sorry, what I'm seeing here is different what's up here. So this is NSF's definition of travel costs, and it's pretty basic. It would be flight, mileage, whatever the expense an individual incurs to attend the event. But of course, we have to use the US flag here, the usual rules that we follow. So travel symbol, are there any questions on that? There's really not. Okay, so then the other category, other, which is our catch-all, just like regular direct costs, other. Are there, just may have an example of what might fall under an other participant support costs that we've not already talked about? Nobody have a try? So registration fees would fall there. Books or manuals that are directly attributed to the individual fall there. Sometimes in large training grants or fellowships, tuition could be covered, lab fees could be covered, insurance fees, things of that. So again, it's the kind of a catch-all category, but there are really not a lot of things that would fall in what's allowable is something that.
Can you be a participant and a fellow at the same time?
Yes. But like NSF has, Tracy, we were talking about some of the large training grants and fellowships that the fellow could receive tuition and be considered.
Yeah, because you're not an employee as a fellow, right?
Right.
Online question?
Yeah.
It says, why isn't registration fees allowed?
They are.
I think the slide confused people.
Oh, whoops. I think
Went ahead
Tracy,
too fast, sorry.
I went too fast. Sorry about that.
Just discussing other category. So that would be in our discussion before about what would fall under that bottom number 4, other registration fees may be appropriate in there. Like if they're required to pay a registration fee to attend the training. Yes.
But not a membership fee.
Not generally a membership fee, it depends. If the training event is occurring at some sponsor, entity is holding it and they are required, people to attend have to have that membership, that would be an exception that could be included. So again, you always gotta look at the areas of gray. If you're ever in doubt, reach out to your OSP team, but look at your solicitation and guidance from the sponsor. NSF has really great guidance on participant support.
And it always has to be attributed to the individual. That's the key.
Anyway,
Yeah. So back to our slide with the big red X. So what are some examples of things that would not be considered participant support? I mean, I think we've already talked about quite a few, and anybody has anything that they can share that would not be considered?
AV equipment.
Yeah.
Right, that's something where they're trying to stick costs in there.
Yeah.
The costs associated with the meeting, it's like, no.
again, we can stay that room rentals, honorarium for speakers. And employees, if it's a training grant and they're an employee, generally they cannot be a participant. And I say generally because there's always an exception. Sure as I say, they can never be allowed, there's always going to be an exception. So you have to, again, check the sponsor guidance. But for the most part, employees cannot be participants. The one exception I've seen to that is where you have a student on a GTA that is a participant on a research training grant. So kind of, they are employed by the university, but not in a research capacity. Their job is not related to research. So there could be an exception in that kind of example.
One that we get, I think often, or we get asked about often from animal sciences is, what if we want to pay somebody to take a evaluation for us? Because they're returning a product, it's not supported, right?
That's
It's not-
participation incentive. So you're incentivizing them to return this survey, basically is what you're doing, an evaluation or a survey.
Okay, the next slide. So we've given some
We've
examples.
got another question over here in the chat.
Well, there's a few comments. One said salary, and someone else said employee expenses.
Exactly. So that goes along with, if you have a participant, they're paid a flat rate stipend. It is not salary and fringe. So NIH has great, big training grants that are individual or for a big, large training grant where you have multiple participants training. And so they're paid a stipend. So you would budget them under participant support costs with a flat amount. And NIH, for some of their training grants, has really got great documentation as compared to some other sponsors where it depends on their years of experience. Sometimes they have a whole range that they recommend for salary rate or stipend levels, not salary. And then again, employees cannot be participants, so you can't have employee salary in participant support costs either. And then here we've got on this slide, I'll let Catherine kind of go into this a little bit.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of these employees that are being compensated by the award, speaker honoraries, venues, fees for projects, even subject incentives, we didn't get into much more detail, but I think we.
And you have to be careful. One of the things on here is meals, materials for non-participants. So if you have employees and participants and you're providing meals, it's going to be a real sticky situation that you account for that appropriately and that you're not including in those participant support costs meals that employees are taking up, or you're not giving participants subsistence on top of the meals. So their subsistence should be reduced if they're getting meals provided at the conference as part of another expense line. So that can be a little bit sticky and gray as well. So you need to be careful and stipulate that.
Some of this guidance says local attendees who are not participants have to be segregated.
I know.
It's like, all right, if you're an employee, you sit on that side of the room. Don't come over to the buffet.
Put a
you know.
big red E on your shirt.
Yeah. They're very clear, but I love that they have to be segregated. So they're pretty specific about that. Oh, sorry, I'm still seeing the wrong slide. So,
This is the one that's shown on
Yeah.
the screen.
and I'm just, you know what, I'm gonna stand up so I can see the slides. So in KR, when you're budgeting, participant support, you'll obviously, the category type is at the top, and you'll pick one of these four categories that we just discussed. They all are indirect exempt, so no indirect costs are charged there, which is why I think we see a lot of people who want to put all kinds of things in participant support when they're developing their budget. Everything, of course, in their justification has to be itemized and justified as to why it is participant support cost. When the award is received, everything is segregated into a participant support account, separate from the rest of the award. And if at award, you need to reallocate the funds, if for some reason you need to move money from, say, regular travel into participant support travel, which we just had to do, you have to request permission from the sponsor. So we had to go to NSF, get their okay to move travel funds into participant travel account. The PI had not budgeted enough, and of course, travel costs have increased so significantly that we had to make that shift. But it went smoothly, but it does have to be reallocated because of that estimated difference.
One last note on that piece is that anytime you're making any kind of request like that, it goes to sponsor programs.
Yes.
So reach out to your sponsor programs team. They will tell you the information they need to submit that request, and they will submit it on your behalf. We have a question from the chat.
Is IDC the same as MTDC? If
Okay.
not, what's the distinction?
IDC is indirect costs, which are also known as F&A. Some people still call it overhead, which is not the way we like to define it. MTDC is modified total direct costs. So if your project, as it is with federal grants or most federal grants, direct costs are charged on the modified total direct costs. So that excludes things like participant support costs, tuition. If it was total direct cost, it's you wouldn't have that differentiation, and direct costs would be charged on the whole direct cost base. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Too many acronyms in.
Yeah, so
It's
that's
just,
our federally negotiated rates are all MTDC, modified total direct costs. And so, as Catherine noted, those things are excluded. The other thing that's included in our modified total direct costs is we only assess indirect costs on the first $25,000 of each sub, so that's another one. But we will, if you have any other questions about indirect, reach out to your team, so we can kind of keep going on this one.
Lisa, thank you.
Great, glad that helped. Participation incentives. Some folks call it participant incentives. I like to differentiate the two because participant support is one thing, participation where you're giving somebody an incentive to return a survey. Or we want you to come to this workshop, we want to get your feedback as we're developing a product that you might be our end users, and we want to get some feedback, and we're encouraging you to fill out this evaluation survey, whatever, and we're going to give you $5 for if you return it to us. So we're going to give you a gift card or something along those lines. That is an incentive to participate in the research. It is not participant support. And the benefit, again, on this one is to the project. It's not to the individual. So that's why you're paying them to come help you move forward with your project and gather some information. Participation incentive examples are monetary compensation, gift certificates, raffles, lotteries, memorabilia, petty cash, and others. Petty cash and seems a little odd, but I did have a PI years ago. And there are cases where they need to take cash to a foreign country because they don't have the banking systems and they're trying to get local in a remote village, trying to get people to participate. And so they may need to take cash. I have a story of a PI years ago when I was in college vet med that found out after the fact he had $11,000 in a waste belt that he took to another country. Gave me a heart attack afterwards, but if you have the situation, reach out to your team so we can kind of help you navigate that. Our sponsor programs can help you navigate that the safest way possible. And again, the types of incentives that are allowable depend on institutional policies. Some institutions may not allow you to do the gift card route. So you need to check with your own institutional regulations or department. Sponsor programs would be the best place to check there. And in the just budget narrative, you need to justify and include that line item in your justification. And one little quick note, when you have participation incentives or you're getting surveys, this is kind of an aside. You need to make a note to check with IRB. Because when you're doing any kind of interaction with humans on your research project, it's a human subject. It will most likely come back as exempt depending on what you're doing, but you have to reach out to the RICRO office and there are forms that they can fill out and kind of lead you through their process. It's usually pretty quick. If it's just surveys, it usually ends up being exempt. We're gonna go to the next slide. Nope. This is the first time I've gone through this and it rolls in these books. So let me just go through this really quickly. I have to hit this arrow in the exact right spot because it keeps popping up a menu. Okay. Share in the chat or raise your hand on key points that you use to define or describe participant incentives. So any other examples that you all would use to kind of differentiate between participation incentives and participant support costs? I'll give you a few seconds to see if we get anything in the chat. Anything coming in?
Hold on, we have incentivizing someone is not participant support.
Spot on. That's very good. So in Quali, they have added this participation cost F&A applies. We didn't used to have this in our object code dropdown. But after confusion with participant support, OSP thought it was a great idea to kind of come up with a budget object code for folks so that you could truly see this is where indirect cost does apply. It's just participation costs, which is again why I changed the verbiage in here to say participation incentives rather than participant incentives to try and make that differentiation a little bit bigger.
A lot of times in my justifications, I'll use just research incentives and just drop the word participation. It's a lot cleaner. Makes more sense certainly to our PIs. So I wish that that's terminology that would be adopted more broadly.
It's always fun with research administration because you have one item that's got 3 or 4 different names depending on how long you've been in the field, so.
So this is just to go over again some of the points that we raised, the difference between the two support incentives. Again, support benefits the participant as an individual, not employees. No indirect, no F&A. Sponsor approval is required for reallocation, I think is what that is. And of course, it's directly applicable. And incentives, it encourages participation or attendance. Anybody's eligible, employees or non-employees. F&A is charged. It's one of the few places that memorabilia and souvenirs and some of the other kind of terminology that it may be allowable, depending on what incentives are allowable. But memorabilia may not be.
You gotta check with your institutional, with CSU policies.
Yeah, and also with the guidance and the requests for proposals, and directly and indirectly applicable.
Financial considerations. Participant support payments are approved in the award. They're made in accordance with university institutional policies. They are taxable to the recipient and they must be accounted for separately. As Catherine mentioned at CSU, we have separate participant support accounts. You have a question? Chat.
It was on the previous slide.
Okay.
The question is, could you elaborate on raffles? I noticed you had a question mark next to that on the slide.
This slide presentation was presented at an ACORA conference, so it's national. So again, we have to check CSU policy to see if we have a policy on raffle to be allowable as an incentive. I've not seen it in the years that I've been at CSU, so I would have to do some digging honestly to find out the definitive answer if CSU allows that. Raffles would be kind of difficult to do in my opinion, and I've not seen that included in participant support for or participation.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
The most common thing we see are gift cards.
Yeah.
And that's really the same because it's easier to track for accounting purposes, instead of giving a cash incentive to give gift cards. So that's, for me, is pretty much
Yeah.
the standard, other than the petty cash in foreign countries. I see that quite often.
Those are the two examples I see, but yeah, go ahead.
Follow-up comment is, what's the sticking point?
For raffle.
So like a raffle, if you had 30 people coming in to do your sleep study, right? And you said everyone's name is being entered, but only one of you will actually win a prize, that would be the raffle situation that they're talking about.
I just don't know that it would.
I don't think it would
have
incentive,
appeal. Yeah, I
it would
don't
be
think that it
an
would.
incentive,
Right.
because if you've got a 1 in
That's when.
30 chance of,
Yeah.
yeah,
that's.
it's not truly a great incentive, yes.
Well, I also know in the nonprofit world that I came from, that when we were holding raffles at conferences, every state has different laws, and sometimes you have to apply for special license for a raffle. You
Very
can
true,
do
yeah.
a silent auction, but you can't do a raffle without approval. It's a gambling context thing, so it's not only your university, but also the location of where that's happening.
And I would suspect that's why we don't see them. For one, it's not much of an incentive, and there are
Yeah.
gambling rules, because you're right, that doesn't put you gambling.
Probably
In
some
some
reason for
states.
lotteries too. It's just, yeah.
Yeah.
In some states, not all states.
When I've been to encourage conferences, they kind of have a silent auction kind of a thing occasionally. And it's to, there's always a nonprofit or to benefit the region or something along those lines, but, yeah, I don't often ever.
Those are different than raffles, because
Yeah.
it's not considered gambling.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
some states,
Yeah.
so, and I always say in some states, because not all states consider raffle gambling, but some do.
Yeah. So again, it gets too complex and complicated with that, so I think that's probably why we don't see more of that. And back to the financial considerations, incentives are included in award and IRB protocol. Because again, if you're having human subjects, which it may not require full IRB review, because if it's just a survey, it's not invasive. But you always have to submit something to the RICRO office, and they will let you know whether your human subjects involved in your research is exempt or not. Typically, when it's just surveys, I've always seen it come back as exempt, and it's not as full a protocol that's required if you're doing something invasive with human subjects. Payments are made in accordance with institutional policies, as we said, and they are taxable. Either scenario, they're taxable to the recipient.
Even those.
Yep.
So this is from the University of Texas at Dallas, their decision tree on whether a cost is participant support or incentive. So these are just some of the decision points. The person an employee. Where would that fall?
You be a participant.
Can't be a participant, right? Person's receiving fringe benefits.
Yeah.
Can't be a participant.
Yeah. The person's responsible for deliverables. Person's working in a lab.
Employee. I assume you mean.
Well, that depends, because it says working, but are they being paid, or is that part of their training grant experience?
Good question. Or here's an example. A student who is an employee of the university, but not on the project. Like if the student's an employee, I'll take the word lab out of here, but if a student works at the bookstore, let's say, they could be a participant if they're attending some sort of, say, summer training.
It's a much better example than the GRA versus GTA. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head, yeah. You have to be working in food service or something.
Right.
You're gonna be a-
They would still be, you could work in food service and still participate in the research for undergrad. Research experience for undergrad from NSF, so. The lab could be, there could be some gray area with that one, just like the employee category. Is the person participating in a research project by being part of a survey or training team? Incentive, simple. IRB protocol.
Someone wanted clarification.
Yeah.
The conclusion about the person responsible for deliverables.
The person responsible.
In the third one.
The third one.
Oh, because if they're responsible for the deliverables, they are driving the scope of work. They have some indirect impact to the scope of work, which means the research project gets the benefit, so they are not a participant. It would be a participation incentive if they were given an incentive for something, but because remember that participation incentives can be employee or non-employee. Whereas the participant support, they cannot be employed, and they definitely are not going to be driving the scope of work if they're not employed on the grant.
Participant supports, there is to be a participant and receive participant support costs. There is no deliverable other than completing whatever the training or the workshop or what have you. It's anticipated that you will complete that event. Is the person attending a conference or training project? That could be both. Participant support. Is the person part of an NSF research experience for undergrads? Are you treatment time? Participant support. Yeah. Can the funds be rebudgeted without prior approval? Participants on that participant support, right? Support.
You can move more money into participant support typically, but you can't move money out of position.
So if you want to increase your participant support, because you didn't have enough, you've got more participants from your related non-participant support. Typically, you don't need prior approval for that, but anytime you're moving costs out of participant support, yes, you need prior approval. But as always, if in doubt, reach out to your OSP team. They have the award and the regulations specific to that award, so they can advise you the best. And they always like to be in the loop, so we really advise you not to reach out directly to the sponsor without involving OSP.
So an example I mentioned earlier, that when the participant support costs were budgeted, specifically the travel, it was not enough when the project actually came to fruition. So they had to take money out of the regular travel, move it into participant support travel. And our senior research administrator worked with NSF to approve that. We had to do a budget update. We had to rewrite the budget justification, submit all of that to NSF, and then they could move the funds internally. So, you know, there are definitely some steps involved, because it all changes the indirect on the project, right? In this case, because we are moving funds into participant support, we were able to get more money because what had been originally designated for indirects were then eligible to go into participant support since there are no indirects. Yeah, so it ended up being, there was a little acceleration of the funds because they went into participant support.
And I shared something with Shannon, it was the NSF little handout. Is that on here at all? Or it'll be available to folks? NSF came out with a kind of a worksheet to guide you through these questions on whether it's participant support or not. And it should be available, I think, with the handouts, but let me see on the slide deck. Show that to you quickly.
Questions are on that? About assessment.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I do have something to share. I was at an In-Cure conference where Jean Feldman spoke regarding participant support, and she gave a very similar explanation about if a student is an employee in something completely different, but then is still a participant being involved in a project
Right.
that's not necessarily related to the employment in that case.
Right.
And she said, there is a difference.
Yeah.
And she was very adamant that it's not always just because you're an employee. it's a
Right,
no.
right. Right.
So you have to understand the connection. Is it related to the employment or not?
And Catherine just shared in the chat, the handout participant support cost self-assessment, tool from NSF that they just came out with. So that's a really handy, tool to use as you're working on your proposal budgets and trying to determine whether it is participant support costs eligible or not. Do you have any other questions? I'm gonna go back to this slide really quick, and we just have references on the last slide. So there's YouTube videos from Ancura on this subject, the PAPPG from NSF, there's a link there. Proposal award policy newsletter. This one goes back to 2017, but it's still relevant today. It's got a lot of good questions. And it was just a newsletter. If you scroll down, it's not on the first page. So if you get into that newsletter, I think it's like the third or fourth page. And there's a really good discussion of kind of FAQs. Well, is this participant? So they kind of explain that there. So yet another tool to help you make that determination. Any other questions coming in from the chat? Oh. Well, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your attendance and your input. The next session options, 3:30 to 4:30 is working with industry. All right, roadmap to fellowships, USDA getting into the weeds and effective weed control. So I hope you will, even if you didn't sign up, there's room. So join in on this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.